pleased to have Brady and Rivers speak to us about what we're all interested in, which is the next election. It's coming up sooner and faster. We're talking more and more, but it's called Key Issues in the 2022 Midterm Election. They have a little about your poll, what the results are in the poll. And I understand the presentation will begin, Brady, and so jump in anytime.
I'll go correct the readings. Go.
Anyway, so go ahead, guys.
Okay. So since the Bush campaign and George W. Bush campaign, there was a lot of talk about what the base means, and the base has become more important. By the base, that simply means turning out your own party's vote. And so what I'm going to base my presentation on issues is the following. I want to talk. There's only three ways you can get votes. People in your own party vote for you, the base, or people from the other party vote for you and they defect and vote for you. And the third way is you get independents to vote. And issues play a role in all of these things. So I'm going to start out with the party effect first. And next slide, sorry. So this is party identification just from June till September, the latest YouGov Economist poll. And as you get closer to the election, what happens is you see the number of independents drops, and the number of people, because when you ask the question, say yourself a Democrat, Republican, or independent, on the 3-point first question, they simply say if they're going to vote, they could be an independent, but if they're going to lean, say, well, I'm going to lean Democrats, so I'll say Democrats, so that drops. But as you can see, the party identification, if they're getting closer, Democrats have a little bit of advantage, but not much. Second question is the 7-point question, where we take into account the famous leaner gap. Are leaners really partisans or not? I don't want to get into that because it's a complicated question. But as you can see, even on this question, when you say, in other words, the follow-up to the question, you say, are you Democrat or Republican or independent? Follow-up is, if you're a Democrat, you say, are you strong or weak? Same with Republican. But if you're independent, you ask, do you lean Democrat or lean Republican? And so that scale, this is the separate one. And again, you can see the Democrats going into the election have a little bit of a lead, but it's close. And so the parties, there is a difference in terms of the vote. Next slide, please. This is the one I want to, so this is I gave you the example of defectors versus the base versus independent vote. But I want to point out the amazing change that has occurred. So if you look at Eisenhower, 28 and 22% of his vote in 52 when he won, and in 1956 when he won. Huge amounts of his vote came from Democrats who voted for him. And then again, you might note Nixon's 2 wins in 68 and 72. His 22 and 32, in fact, 41% of his vote in that vote came from defectors. And even Reagan, when he won the first election in 1980, he has 24% vote came from Democrats who voted for Reagan. Now, if you notice, after Reagan, you see that the base continues to grow in importance, always over 80%, and you get fewer defectors and independents. So over time, what's happened is as the parties have firmed up, and I'll show you why in just a minute, as the parties have firmed up, what happens is elections are determined more and more by the smaller number of voters, these defectors, and actually independents. And this is just, next slide, sir. Next slide is just a graph showing you the importance of defectors versus the party base. As you can see, post-Reagan, 84, 88, the base became much more important. You get fewer defectors, et cetera, et cetera. Next slide. Why did that happen? And that happened because of what's now called polarization. But what really happened in polarization was there was a sorting first. And so you can see from 1970 to that last number is 2020. You can see that liberals on that chart, liberals became more Democrat. People who were conservative became less Republican, and conservatives switched to the Republican Party, as you can see in that far right graph. So this simply says, ask people, are they liberal, conservative, or moderate? And then what happens to their party affiliation. And so you can see what happened is over this time period, particularly starting with Reagan and the jump, conservatives moved into the into the Republican Party, and liberals moved into the Democratic Party. And next chart. And so if you looked at the latest YouGov, it simply shows if you look at this, say party by ideology, this last YouGov Economist poll. And as you can see, for the Democrats, very liberal and liberal are the two things. That's about 60% of the party. But the problem for the Democrats is that 40% of the party is either moderate or conservative. And that tension between the progressive wing and the moderate wing of the party is what's going to be important for issues in the election. But now, if you look at the Republicans, if you can see on the side that for the Republicans, about 80% of Republicans are either conservative or describe themselves as conservative or very conservative, middle part of the graph. And then the third one is people who say they're independent. And you may notice the dominant category among independents is they're moderate. So they swing. Okay, so now I'm going to turn to, and we can run this, I can run this by social issues, economic issues. You get a little bit of different patterns. So now let's go to issues. And so parties are about even. And I think defectors and independents are going to decide this election. So you get down to pretty small numbers. There's 30 House districts that are really going to decide who controls the House of Representatives. And there are 7 Senate seats that are going to decide what happens in the Senate. And if I didn't need to do that, I might point out to you that the 2020 election was won by a total of about 45,000 votes in the Electoral College in Arizona, Wisconsin, Georgia. 45,000 votes switch, and Trump is president. So now I want to next slide. This is defectors from McGovern in 72. This is defectors from Carter in 76 and 80. And note, the point I'm making is the people who defected from McGovern were overwhelmingly, these are Democrats, moderate and conservative, almost 90%. And the same thing is true in 76 and 80. And so the point is very simple. I'm not going to show any more data. It's very simple. The people who defect from the Democratic Party are moderates and conservative because the Democrats have a tendency to nominate leftist candidates. People who defect from the Republican Party are people who are more moderate or liberal. Not very many liberals in the Republican Party, but the moderates in the Republican Party, they're the ones that defect from Republican candidates who are too conservative. So that's the defectors. Issues make a difference to the defectors.
Let me just interrupt for a second. How are you measuring these?
This is actual, oh, you mean the one before?
Or this one?
What's percentages of?
These are percentages of the defectors. Of the defectors. Yeah, no, this is a survey from the American National Election Studies that goes all the way back to 1952. And so now, up to that point, I've been using ANAS. Now I'm going to use. Okay, next. I'm sorry. So there's 3 economic issues that look like the Republicans would have the advantage on. They are inflation, taxes, and jobs in the economy. Now, I combined the 3 of them to say these are issues that I'll show you a little bit more. They break down, but I combined these to talk about here are the economic issues that you think Republicans have the advantage on, and you can see over time that inflation, blue line, that inflation is the most important, and taxes and the economy have tended to drop a bit. So it's inflation is the most important issue.
What is it jumping?
Pardon?
I can't see the year. Well,
I'm not,
High point inflation.
I'm sorry.
It's in July 9th.
It's July, it's July 9th and July 16th that week. So
That's all 2022 numbers.
yes, it's all 2022. Last six. So the point is that these issues, these are issues Republican, you can see inflation is the highest. Then it's jobs in the economy and taxes and spending have come down a little bit. I've got all at this point I'm doing is just showing this is over the whole country. I'm not dividing anything by party. I'm just asking which issues are most important, and those are the percentages. Then here are the next slide, major Democratic issues through I'm sorry, June through, it should be September, sorry. And here, the three issues are healthcare, climate change, and abortion. And you have seen the abortion peaked at about the time you'd expected to peak after the decision, drops down a little bit, but as you get closer to the election, the abortion issue comes back up. And so for the Democrats, the three big issues, not the Democrats, the issues that you would expect to favor Democrats are issues on climate change, healthcare, and abortion. And again, these are not these are just the percentages of people who say these are the most important, it's the most important issue to me.
Given all 6 issues, or
There are all kinds, they're given 15 issues that they could choose from.
these are the top?
And so there's crime, there's civil rights, civil liberties, all sorts of stuff. None of the rest of them really get over 4%, save one issue, which is this. Immigration as an issue started to trend back up, and that's an issue that you would again expect favor Republicans. So all I've done at this point is try and set up and say issues are important because issues are going to drive people to defect from one party to the other, from one party to another, the other party. And then independents don't have a party definition. They're going to decide, and I'm going to look at how the issues affect them. Okay, so this is again, there's no party in this at all. This just says if you thought the Republican major issues, if any one of those three issues you thought was the most important, taxes, jobs, inflation, then this is how you vote. In June, 20% were voting Democratic. September, latest poll, a little different, 3 points. Democrats have picked up a little bit. But in general, you can see that if people think those are the important, the economic issues are important, they favor Republicans by around 50%. If, on the other hand, to the other side, what happens is, if you favor Democrats, if you thought the major issue was climate or abortion, or you thought it was healthcare, any one of those three issues, then you can see there's many more people. Democrats get a higher percentage of people who think those issues are important. They're getting 82 compared to 70. 82, they're getting 80 to 15 of the Democrats on the Republican issue, 70 to 23. And then you might note still the economic issues are more important. They've gone down a little bit from 40 to 37. And the Democratic issues, healthcare, abortion, have gone up from 27 to 30, mainly due to the increase in the rise of abortion. So on the set of those, Republicans the Republican issues seem to play better with the public. People who are concerned about the economy are more likely to vote in terms of Republican, and the opposite on those other issues. Next slide. So these are non-major issues that are less than, other than immigration, they're around 4 or 5% max. So there's crime, immigration. The three Republican issues you think would favor them would be crime, immigration, and national security. And the issues, minor issues that Democrats are favored on are education, guns, and civil rights. And you can see, again, in general, that's right. But on this set of issues, the Republicans have pretty big advantage. So in September, 23% of people said one of those issues was important. Only 23% say they're voting Democratic, 71% Republican. And on the Democratic minor issues, you see it's 67-27. So the Democrats lose a little bit on that set of issues. All right, party effect. So next one. Now, these issues are sorted by party, and here's what I want to show you about the defectors. So if you were someone who said the economic issues were the most important, note that even though you're a Democrat, only 87% of you are voting. So you're getting 7% of Democrats who said economic issues were most important. 7% of them are defective. And on the other hand, on the set of issues for Republicans, you see there's very few, very little direction, 3%. But notice that among independents who said that issue, economic issues were biggest, it's 13-7. Big advantage for Republicans. Next slide. Now here are these same things for the Democrat. If you said the Democratic issues were most important, then here you got the opposite. So 96, only 2% of who thought that was important were Democrats, defect. But notice 11% of Republicans who thought abortion, it's probably abortion, but Doug's going to talk about an interesting experiment he's done on that. And again, note among independents now it's 76-11. So this is how issues make a difference. You pick up defectors in the other party, and you're picking up independents. Next one. Now, what I haven't done throughout all this, given time limitations, etc., I just want to show that it makes a difference. So I lumped all three of those issues together as economic, but if I break them out, as I do here, say inflation versus jobs, you can see there are differences. That if you're a Democrat and inflation is your prime issue, Republicans get 8%. They're gonna defect. 8% are gonna defect. But if you're a Democrat who said jobs was the most important one, you're only getting 5% defection. And the same thing in the road. So these defection rates that I lumped under the general issues of economic, they're going to vary some by the specific basis. And next one. And you can see how true this is on abortion. So if abortion is your main issue, zero, if a Republican who said abortion was an important issue to me, 0% are defecting and are saying 96% are voting for them. But note among independents, if it's abortion versus climate change, again, abortion doesn't seem to cut quite as strongly as the others, but it's still a relevant variable. Okay, now next to the last go. So it all gets sorted out interestingly by party in this way. So this is the same poll, but now I'm not asking anything about issues. I'm just saying, are you a Democrat, Republican, Independent, and what's the fact that it's June to September? So I'll note among Democrats, not much. A little bit of decline, as you'd expect, in the number of Democrats who would defect, 4% under Democrat. Among Republicans, a little bit more defection, and I think that's probably due to abortion, but we'll hear more on that. Notice the important thing is, so among the partisans, there's not a lot of change. I showed you a little bit of the movement on defectors, but notice among independents, it's gone from 27 in June to 40-43. So it's close now among independents. And now there's a lot of room between now and the election. What happens if gas prices go up and as the economic issues go up in importance? And so we'll come to the end with some conclusion.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Are these likely voters, registered voters?
These are all likely voters.
Likely voters.
Double checked. I'm not going to talk about how accurate that is and how good we've been at that in the past, but that's a separate story.
There isn't that much difference this year. It's Democrats have done well among suburban college graduates. The gap between likely and registered numbers has shrunk quite a bit.
This year. All right, so this is the last one. So the point I'm making is issues are very important. The base is more important. You can see how it's sorted out. But issues matter in terms of what issues get members of the other party to defect and what happens to independents. And you can see beginning in August and September, it starts to get closer. And you can see that Republicans have about a 1 point advantage in the generic poll, which is generally good for going into the election. And if the election were held today, I would say the Republicans would take the House by anywhere from 224 to max 230 would be my view. Doug may have other views. So that's it for me.
Dave,
All right. So if we had a time machine and we went back a year, November of 2021, you had the Virginia governor's race, which pitted Glenn Youngkin, as moderate Republican, running against a Clinton Democrat in a blue state. Virginia's consistently 5 to 10 points Democratic in recent years. And Youngkin won that race, and that was quite surprising. Fast forward another 6 months, April, May of this year, you have a situation where gas is at $6. Biden's popularity is in the mid 30s. Legislation is stalled in Congress, and it's Build Back Better is not particularly popular. And the polls had Republicans leading in the congressional voting by about 4 points. What would that mean? Well, it would mean a disaster for Democrats. That in 2020, Democrats won the House vote by about 3 points and just barely eked out a majority. With the Republicans winning by about 4 points, round numbers, you expect them to pick up 30, 35 seats. Now we come to today, and we actually seem to have a fairly contested election. Gas is about $4 nationally, and the Biden approval is recovered to the mid 40s. Great, not as bad as it was 6 months ago. The Inflation Reduction Act, that is Build Back Better relabeled and shrunk, passed. You have the Dobbs decision, and you have Donald Trump picking Republican candidates for the Senate and House. You take that set of factors, as the sociologists like to say, the result is overdetermined. There are a lot of things that cause that. So Dave and Mo and I have been arguing over the impact of abortion. I think a year ago we all sort of said, nah, it's not going to have a big effect. There are more pro-choice people than pro-life people. The bulk of the public is actually more in between. So if you ask, and I'll show you some data on this in a second, about a 15-week abortion ban, that's probably the modal position of the public. So the net effect of that, Supreme Court doing in that, I think we thought was going to be relatively modest. Now, I think we guessed they would sort of do what Roberts did, which was that he was going to allow the Mississippi law to stand and not do anything that would attract that much attention, and it'd probably have relatively little effect. I don't think we anticipated the Alito decision, followed by Thomas piling on and saying not just Roe, but also Griswold and Obergefell, and all those are on the table as well. I'm not terribly satisfied with the kind of most important problem question. It's a standard question. It's asked on the phone. It's just an open end, what's on the top of your head. When you do it online, like our polls, you have to give people a list, and the list changes as stuff changes in the news. The thing, the issue that's most important seems to predict what's in the news, or what's in the news predicts what's listed as most important, but there's precious little evidence that actually predicts how people vote. They seem to vote more or less the same way, regardless of what the most important issue is. What you're going to see for a few minutes is essentially my attempt to get a better handle on issue importance and how it might impact this election. So the first thing was the standard question doesn't require you to make any trade-offs. You can list 3 or 4 issues and they count them up. I tried asking people to rank the issues in terms of importance. And so we picked these six issues shown here. And what you see is the number 1 issue that gets ranked first by 40% of the people is inflation. Number 2 was threats to democracy. And then abortion's a distant third, 13%. So a lot of people looked at this and said, look, it's on the order of 1/10 of the population says this is the most important issue for them. And so it can't have that big an impact. Whereas something like inflation, 40% should have a much bigger effect.
Just a question. So war in Ukraine's got lots of news too, right? Is that?
It's in the news, but yes, turns out people, to tell all my IR friends, people don't care about anything that happens outside the US. Interestingly enough, let's go to the next slide.
How recent was this data pool?
This weekend.
Okay.
Yesterday.
I got the data 2 days ago. So it's particularly striking among Republicans. 41% Ukraine is least important. So I'm old enough to remember when the Russian bear was something that we worried about, but that's apparently not a big deal in the current Republican Party. We've done some focus groups on this, and it is amazing. Don't spend money on Ukraine and the Europeans and that sort of thing when the sort of nationalism has turned that. You go to Democrats, which is the next slide. You see that they actually are a little more, seem to care a little more about it, or rank it a little higher. Also notice only 22% of Democrats say the number 1 issue is inflation. 47% say threats to democracy. Go back one, we compare that to Republicans. 57% of Republicans say inflation is the most important, and only 14% say threats to democracy, and only 9% say abortion. So one of the difficulties is, threats to democracy, that means different things to different people. To Democrats, it means Donald Trump tried to steal the election. To Republicans, the big steal means Biden stole the election. It used to be that things like inflation and unemployment, members of the 2 parties tracked closely together. That is, the ones that thought inflation was high and unemployment was low were about the same in both parties. In the last 20 years or so, what's happened is that if you are the party that's the incumbent president, you tend to think things are pretty good, and it's the other party that thinks they're terrible. And so when the administrations switch, economic evaluations for the party leaving power suddenly become much worse. The things that were great, for Republicans in early November of 2020, suddenly the economy has taken a tailspin in several weeks after the outcome of the election.
For Democrats, it shot up.
And the other way for Democrats. This is particularly pronounced among Republicans. So, one of the things of trying to figure out this, and I don't know how to solve this exactly, is, what you say is most important is endogenous, and it's not clear whether it's driving your preference or your preference is driving what you think is important. Right. Let's skip one more. Here's another example of this. So one of the most popular survey questions of all time is this thing is the country headed in the right direction, or are we seriously off on the wrong track? And Gallup has been asking this for 75 years, and it's the golden oldie, so we ask it as well. Never quite sure what it means, since there hasn't been over 50% thinking the country's on the right direction in the last 50 years, which means that every year, if we really are headed in the wrong direction, we must be really, back to the dark ages or something.
We're just like bad drivers.
This is the one, of course, that flips more than anything else in the administration change. But what you see is the blue line is Democrats, and so they're more likely to think we're headed in the right direction than Republicans, who are under 20%. And then the first vertical line is the leak of the Dobbs decision. Excuse me, this is not Democrats and Republicans, it's pro-choice and pro-life, but those are kind of interchangeable. Anyway, so the leak of the Dobbs decision, what suddenly happens is there's like I think it was about 8-9 point drop in pro-choice people saying the country is headed in the wrong direction, whereas the pro-life people didn't think anything. If anything, it looks like there may be a small bump in the other direction. And then show you that rationality is overrated, since the whole decision was leaked 3 months earlier. When the decision was actually released, you can see what happens is you get a 10-point drop, an additional one on top of that of saying the country's headed in the wrong direction. So that at that point, the pro-choice group, which is overwhelmingly Democratic, is less optimistic about where we are than the out of power Republicans. And then it's sort of been recovering back. What does that mean? Well, it can mean a whole bunch of things, but I won't speculate. Okay, let's go to the next one. All right, so on abortion, what does the landscape look like? So among, roughly speaking, 10 to 15% of the electorate is abortion never, no how. And another 20% is always, under any circumstances, no restrictions, public funding, and so forth. And then you've got roughly 60% or so in between there that are abortion under some conditions. It depends how you ask it. So what I did here is I used a pair of questions that are the ones that are a little more specific than the traditional items, which are: you favor abortion always, sometimes, never? So we first asked people, do you favor a 15-week ban? And if they said yes, then we asked people who said yes, would you favor a complete ban? So that puts people into 4 categories: favoring a complete ban on abortions, a 15-week ban, those that were not sure about a 15-week ban, and then the group that says no ban at all. So among Democrats, a majority, 54%, are in favor of no ban, and 16% of Democrats are actually in favor of a complete ban. Among Republicans, it's reversed, and independents are kind of, nah. This is the kind of data that you look at and go, the partisan effect of this shouldn't be great. The Republicans that are in favor of a complete ban and so forth, they aren't going anyplace. The Democrats that favor no ban aren't going anyplace. And the independents, you would guess a complete ban is going to be a problem, but the median in there is somewhere in terms of some restrictions, not no ban at all. All right, so the next thing is we asked in voting in this election, how important is it? Just on this one specific issue, people telling us how important they say it is to them. Now, again, I sort of don't put a lot of faith in this kind of question. It's easy for people to say everything is very important. There's no cost to it. I'll come back to that. But not too surprisingly, you see the people on the extremes are the ones that's very important to. Well, their votes aren't moving. They're not going to switch from someone that's in favor of a complete ban on abortions. There's not much appealing for them in the Democratic Party and vice versa on the other end. But it's the people in the middle who are, again, at least tell you it's less important to them. So this is all arguing, which I think was the Brady Fiorina view, which is this is not going to have much effect. Now, if you drill down a little bit, you can see that the people who think it's very important are actually not split equally between pro-choice and pro-life voters and Democrats and Republicans. This is the subset of the sample that said abortion is the most important issue for them. And what you see is the Democrats there are overwhelmingly in the none category, more than the typical Democrat. Independents look a lot like the Democrats, and then surprisingly here, Republicans, the ones that say it's very important to them are about equally split between no ban and a complete ban. And I'm sure you've run into people who, at least Brady tells me he runs into people who say, they're Republicans and they're not going to vote Republican this year because of the abortion.
Not many, but a couple.
Yeah, well, we're into anecdotes. We're political scientists. All right, so the next attempt to get at this is, and there are a variety of ways that you might, like a conjoint analysis is something you could try. But the thing I tried was just asking people, would you consider voting for any candidate generically who is pro-life or pro-choice? Okay, and so the top table here shows that 17% say they would consider voting for a pro-life candidate, never consider voting for a pro-choice candidate. And in the lower corner, there's the 30% who say they would consider voting for a pro-choice candidate, but no pro-life candidate. And then the people in the upper right-hand corner are the ones in between, these sort of, the modal voters out there. And if that's the world we were in, I would say abortion wouldn't be playing a big role in this election. The problem is that for years, Republicans had committed to pretty extreme positions, if you look at the Republican platform on abortion. And so they're stuck with these things that the Supreme Court had been saving them from for a long time of, you could be in favor of any kind of draconian restriction, no exceptions for rape, incest, and life of the mother. And it didn't really matter because the legislatures weren't allowed to pass anything on this. And, Dobbs opened that up. And if you look at getting a pro-choice candidate against a pro-life candidate who's in favor of banning all abortions, the group that is yes on pro-life and no on pro-choice candidates is only 12%. And there now is almost a majority, 47% in the, I will consider only the pro-life candidate, not the pro-choice candidate. So that's quite a different picture than one where you've got the candidates running in the top.
This is for House election.
It's generically in the elections. We say in the elections in November, would you consider voting for a candidate?
That would include state legislatures.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is once tried to ask about a California Senate race. And they go, yeah, I favor them for you for Senate. I go, not US Senate.
Okay, right.
But yes, you could believe that in states that have Republican majorities in the legislature, this is going to be a much bigger deal than. Okay. I did some back of the envelopes on what could the effect be here. So basically, if you throw out anybody who says they're a Democrat or Republican, so you're an independent, as your definition, swing voters, among independents, there's about a 35-point advantage of the pro-choice candidate over the pro-life candidate. Roughly a third of the voters are independent, third of that, so you get a ninth. You could say, gee, you could argue there'd be a 10-point effect here, except, all right, let's go to the next one. The other big issue is election integrity. And so we asked, did you think the 2020 presidential election was stolen? 90% of Democrats say no, 7% are confused.
10% total.
Writing survey questions is hard because some people interpret this as did Trump attempt to steal the election? But whatever. But the interesting thing here is basically Democrats say no, it wasn't stolen. Among Republicans, a majority say it was, but it's a much smaller majority. 23% say it wasn't, and another 18% say they're not sure. So, it's really kind of 60-40. It's not one of these issues that Republicans are united on, but a majority of Republicans, a majority of the voters that vote in Republican primaries say yes. So it's tended to push their candidates further out on this than they optimally should be for winning general election. Will this have an effect on the election? So I repeated this, would you consider voting for a candidate that said the election was stolen or was not stolen? So again, we have 12% that looks kind of like the pro-life, extreme pro-life position, would consider that candidate, wouldn't consider one on the opposite side. 49% are in the, yeah, I would vote for somebody who said it wasn't stolen. I wouldn't consider voting for somebody who said it was stolen. So again, you have kind of numbers that are about the same as that table on abortion, and it looks about the same among independents. So you would end up with about again, another 10-point effect. The problem is, of course, it's the same people in these two tables who say they wouldn't do this. Now, as a practical matter, you don't have to choose. The only candidates out there that have the extreme pro-life position are Republicans, and the only ones that think the election was stolen are Republican candidates. And there are no Democratic candidates in those positions. They're on the opposite side of that. I don't think there's a pro-life Democratic candidate running for federal office this year. So at least for this pair of issues, this kind of works. But the problem with this most important kind of thing is that you end up with people having lots of important problems, and they can't all be simultaneously important. All right, so let me finish up. Last slide, yes. So where the election stands today. So the Senate, the candidates there have a lot of visibility. There's a lot of polling in Senate elections. So you can look in the newspaper every day and see kind of what that looks like. My best guess is Democrats get 50 or 51 seats in the Senate. But which ones I couldn't tell you. But it's because of the races are highly variable. There's quite a range that could occur. In the House, there's not much polling or at least any polling that's any good at the House seat level. So we're depending on Typically this generic ballot vote, which is the thing at the bottom, the election for the US House of Representatives were being held today. Always thought that was a weird hypothetical since the election's not being held today. But who would you vote for? And what we show is a 1-point lead for Democrats over Republicans. About 11 points are in the lean category. So if those split one way or the other, it could be pretty different. We've asked a different way is which party would you like to control Congress? And that gets you about the same split. That raises the question of should you believe any of this since the polls were pretty far off in 2020. So I just want to say I'm probably over time, so 1 minute. First, are we doing anything different from 2020? Well, every time we miss, we try to calibrate the results and see how you could fix them. So the main thing that we've added in 2022 over 2020 is to look at primary participation. So after the election in 2020, we found out we had too many Democratic primary voters, not enough. So we've been weighting our samples in 2022 to have the right mix of primary voters and the ones that voted for the Trumpy candidate and the non-Trump candidate, Republican primaries. Will that help? Hopeful, but I doubt it will eliminate all the problems. The second thing that we do that most people don't is we wait to cast a vote. So this is a panel where we're talking to the same people over and over again. So we know how they told us they voted in 2020. And so we can calibrate back to that so that we have the right fraction of 2020 voters. Having said that, we did that in 2020 and it didn't work. It worked well in 2018. So I'm hoping the 2-year gap is better than the 4-year gap. It turns out that over 20% of the population has moved over a 4-year period. And it looked like our problems was coming from movers. And people are moving into some states and out of other states. The other problem is turnout. Turnout is overrated, but in survey, the reason turnout's overrated is the fractions of each group that vote in elections hardly varies at all. And the turnout rate goes from 35% in midterm, 60% in the presidential. Fractions of the electorate in each group are almost identical. It's just everybody's going up or down at about the same rate. But there is the problem in the survey. If you ask people whether they voted, you get massive overstatement of the actual number of voters. We know how many people voted and the percentage we have is too high. Why is that? Well, there are two explanations. One is the only people participating in the surveys are the ones that vote. And the alternative is they're over-reporting. They participate in the surveys, this kind of survey, because they're interested in it. They feel badly saying they didn't vote. We think it's probably about 2/3 or 3/4 of the overstatement versus the self-selection. So we've done more aggressive matching to the voter file to try to weed out people who are misreporting voting. That leads to a whole host of other issues that I could go on for hours and I won't.
By the way, that generic number that he has, historically still gives you Republican majority in the House.
The cut point for a break-even race is about 2% of the vote. And that's partially because of distribution of seats, gerrymandering. The gerrymandering's less people think. This year, there are 10 more Republican uncontested seats and Democratic uncontested seats. And a bunch of those are in Florida where they don't even tabulate vote. So when you get the national vote after the election, it's going to have a sort of understate what support for Republican congressional candidates is.
So what would you bet on the House?
I've gotten burned too many times on this. I'm not betting it. I offered him $1 last night. Would I be willing to bet?
So I'm sure we have lots of questions. I just have one. When I, as a casual observer to you guys, I'm seeing much increase in partisanship. Look on TV, radio, just it's glaring. And you don't seem to pick that up too, except for the.
Well, the thing Dave was showing, no defections.
Yeah.
It used to be,
Part I showed that it's 90, it didn't matter what the issue was, you get 93, 95%. So the number of people who defect from the party compared to what it used to be is minuscule, and that's the effect you're.
elections like 64, 72, and 80, where you had landslides. That's impossible in this environment.
I mean, one of the tragedies, you're getting these elections decided by a smaller and smaller number of voters who fit into specific categories. And as you go across the states, I mean, the Senate, 7 seats, there's seven Senate seats that are going to decide everything. And my view is very small margins in all of those states. And supposedly OPEC oil thing hits in and the gas prices go up in Wisconsin to $5.75. Well, that's going to affect the final race. So that's why I'm not saying anything about the Senate.
The other thing which you don't talk too much about is military, foreign affairs at all. It's not there. So is that
4%? That's all we get in the, any way you look at that.
amazing? Because that's.
National security rose to about 4.5 at a point, and then it fell right back down.
What's it been historically? It hasn't ever been that. It hasn't ever been.
No.
It's never been big.
Boy and Matsu, that's the last time. It's nice to be in a group. Some of you don't know what the hell I'm talking about. Okay, imagine teaching 18-year-olds. That was the 1960 Kennedy-Nixon debate. So Boy and Matsu, that's the last time. Just kidding.
Another missing variable, maybe not variable, but missing category that I thought would have mattered would have been just with Youngkin and all of that with education opening up. Not there.
It doesn't show up on anything.
Was it part of the drop down?
No. I mean, Biden still gets pretty decent ratings on handling of COVID.
One of the few things when you break down us Biden doing on the presidency, it's one of, I think it's maybe now the only one where he has a majority, so he did okay on.
Brady has these liberal Democratic daughters that were outraged about the school closings. And so ran a survey trying to look at parents and so forth. It turned out, nope, it's not there in the data. The story about the parents are outraged and they're going to take it out against the Democrats on COVID policy, pandemic stuff, just isn't in the data.
On national, couldn't, not.
Well, in the Brady family, we'll run the next poll among them.
On local issues, I'm pretty sure it might matter.
Was climate change in your top 6?
Not in mine. I didn't include it because climate change is one of those things that people say is really important. And then you say, how much are you willing to pay in climate changes? And it's like $5.
It seemed like it dominated, like your top, you had 3. It seemed like
For the Democrats, that's always been the number,
top 6.
It's just like Doug says, when you actually do, where you ask them, well, what would you want to pay? Pay? I just want the environment clean. So it's,
Well, somebody else did.
it affects how they vote in the election, but it doesn't affect. They back out quickly.
I have some uncut thoughts on like apathetic, moderate, independent type folks. I think I know a lot of people, friends and acquaintances that don't care about any of these things. They're just normal middle-class people that go to work every day. Their kids go to reasonable school.
You don't care about inflation?
Care about inflation, don't care about, they got kids,
You don't care about education?
everything's working fine in their lives.
Good.
Things are they're just.
Just introduce me to them. Introduce me to them. I need a boost.
I've been exposed to people like this my whole life who don't vote, don't care, love America. They're patriots. They think that it's good enough
So the sample I gave you there is only registered voters who we said had a probability of 80% or plus of voting based on past turnout and intentions. So those wouldn't have been included in this sample.
How many people, I guess Mr. Brady doesn't think there are many like that. Do you, sir, do you think there's like a large population of just people that don't care, don't vote?
15. I'd say 15, 20%.
That's it?
No, so turnout is about 60% of voting age
But it's
population.
registered over time.
Of
It's-
registered voters, it's about 85. Sure, there's a category of people who are not involved in politics, and then of people who vote, most of them are not very well informed. We write these questions like we're writing them academics, and then you then do focus groups with them. We've never really done before. You know, the last couple of years we did it. You know, it's truly incredible the level of information siege is so low on a big chunk of people.
We had to stop doing it because we were beginning to think positively about the Chinese model. We were thinking maybe they're right. It is amazing when you do focus groups how
I just feel like there's some kind of like untapped. There's something here. This group of people can be leveraged if politicians know how to get to them.
Well, I think Trump did have his finger on the pulse of white working class voters, pretty alienated from the Republican.
that's the big change. The white working class voters. Now there's about a 19-point gap favored the Republicans. And the consequence is that among white college educated voters, forget white, they're up about 8.9 points voting Democrat. And that's an advantage of the Republican Party because 2/3 don't have, well, over 2/3 don't have a college degree. So that's been an advantage. And there were some new registrations due to Trump.
Question over here.
So one further thing on that, I mean, they're not libertarian. They're not actually driven by like tax and budget policy, and you know, so like the Paul Ryan kind of platform is not appealing to that group, and that's eventually it's going to create big problems for Republicans. As they're going to have a split between traditional Republican voters, conservatives, and this group, which is more populist nationalists.
Question over here, sir.
Do you ever make that clear, and maybe you said you do, and I just missed it, but that regardless of the issue, I'll vote Republican or Democrat? You know what I'm saying? Like you list a lot of issues. I know I come from South Dakota, right? Strong red state where I think there's a number of voters who really don't care what the issues are when they get to the ballot. They just vote for one party. And it, so can you cipher out of that? Like, yeah, this is all good and well, but regardless, I'm going to vote.
So the dominant theory in political science is that people identify with their parties, and it came out of a sort of sociological, psychological approach, and we found that 10-year-olds could tell you which party they favored, even though couldn't tell you anything about those parties, and those teams and so forth. So a lot of the stuff you have to look at is, well, sure, the issues are correlated with how people are going to vote, but are you just picking up that they have that position because they're on that team? In the end, I view it as we're trying to do prediction, and so we ask people how they're going to vote, and we have a whole bunch of predictors. We're trying to figure out the things that are effective for prediction.
Well, you thought of it like that, then which party it was the only thing that mattered. Then Democrats wouldn't have lost any elections because they've always had a party majority, huge majority. Eisenhower won twice when 55% of the country were Democrats. Nixon kicked McGovern when more Democrats than Republicans. Same with Carter, same with Reagan. And now what's happened is that that the number of people who would swing like that has gone way down. Base is way up, so it's more restricted, but I find it hard to believe that there are issues that we do know that people switch parties in these elections. Fewer of them than used to, but enough that they're the ones that are determining these elections.
I just wonder, has it become somewhat of kind of a cult of personality in some ways? If people's issue isn't the person?
Well, it's always been true. It's true. There's the parties, and that way to think about it, I think, is the parties are a baseline. So ceteris paribus, everything else being equal. Suppose you had, the parties are divided in the following, whatever way they are. And then you have the candidates and the issues are neutral. Doesn't matter. Well, then the dominant party would win the election, you'd expect. But when Eisenhower comes in, he's got the 3 Ks, Korea, communism, and corruption. And so the 3 Ks, that's what they were. And the next thing was he was a war hero. And so he got some votes because people liked him as a candidate, and he got some votes because of the issues. And then Nixon it wasn't for Nixon, it wasn't that, oh, Nixon's a great guy compared to McGovern. It was McGovern's a wacko lefty. We're not doing that. So there was the issues. So issues and candidates both matter.
I have a question for you on the that the news drives the polling lists in terms of the drop downs. So I guess how do you then is that across the range of polls?
Well, I gotta say, I thought Doug overstated that a bit, because facts are there are the jobs in the economy, inflation, and taxes and spending. There is a certain set of issues that are always there, but then some things come and go, and they're not included. But there are some issues that are reasonably.
I just think
It's not like a scientific choice.
No, I know it's not a scientific choice. I agree.
So we are out of time, so I think if questions come, maybe they can come and ask individually, but thank you. This is such an illuminating discussion. Thank you so much.